name's Sharon. I'm a friend of Jacqueline Falcomer and a fan and a reader. And this is her latest book. And it's published recently. It's the story of her family, particularly of her grandmother, the most extraordinary character, Marie's story, and her life and loves, really, her relationship with a complex and complicated character called Bill, who she remains married to for a long time. Her children, her life, her growing up in South Africa, in an Afrikaans community and Afrikaans religion as well. It's a fascinating story. It's really engrossing, a page turner. Everybody I've spoken to has read it agrees that it's a page turner. But what I wanted to say is that today, 21st of August, 2025, Jacqueline and I have just had quite a long chat about it. She in her house at the top of a hill in Tuscany, and me surrounded by seagulls in Brighton in the UK. And this is available online, and I do recommend you watch this interview because it gives you a real insight into Jacqueline's process, how she works, why she's done this, what's come out of it, and some of the issues that it raises for readers, in a most sort of in-depth and informative and captivating way. So I recommend this book most highly, and I also recommend that you watch the interview as well that we have just done. Thank you very much. Hi Jacqueline, how are you? Sharon here.
Sharon, I'm very well, thank you.
And I imagine I sometimes like when I'm talking to writers to think about where they're writing from as well as they're writing to. And in the introduction to your book, you talk about your little house on top of the Tuscan hills. Just
yes,
I'm very quickly where you are and how you got there.
I'm very lucky. I have a tiny little house. It's a gem. It has a beautiful view of the sea. I have lots and lots of olive trees, and real olive grove, fresh fruit trees as well. And it's idyllic because I'm away from it all. It's the perfect writer's spot in that when I want to write, I come here, switch off my phone, and I'm in nature because my house is the last house in at the end of a private road, and it backs onto the natural parkland behind me. So this morning, for example, we had a humongous storm yesterday and last night, but as soon as the storm was over, at about 3:30 in the morning, I have the wild boar running past my bedroom window. The sound of the owls were calling, as well as foxes.
Wow.
So it's a very special place for me. I feel I'm on top of the world, when I look down at the rest of my view, the valley and the sea.
That's marvellous. Well, I'm speaking to you from just on the edge of Brighton. I'm looking out and I can see the South Downs from here. And the sound here is lambs and seagulls, of course, a little bit different.
Lots of seagulls.
Lots of seagulls, as you remember. But we're going to go to another place, which is South Africa, where you come from originally. And I've just finished this lovely, lovely book of yours. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed reading it. It's a cracking good read and really interesting. So I wanted to talk to you about it. I just wondered, first of all, what prompted you to write about your family history? Because it's quite an undertaking, so immensely personal, isn't it? You don't quite know what you're going to turn up. You might have mixed reactions to what you find out, and family may react in different ways to what you're doing. Tell me about what prompted you, the motivation, and that's how you went about it as well.
My Aunt Louise, who was the second daughter, started checking into the family genealogy about in 1972, 73, 74.
While ago then.
And the reason why was because her father, William Balnevis Baker, was reported to have been born and come from New Zealand. But as you will know in the book, he doesn't last for very long. And the girls grew up, my aunts and my mum grew up not knowing very much about him at all. And Louise is a very curious personality. So she set about trying to find out if this was true. And she wrote to New Zealand. She got back letters. Then, of course, she got married and she had children and she was running a business. And that curiosity just went into the bottom drawer. And then a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, she gave me a big wad of paperwork and she said, well, here's what I managed to find out. If you want to continue, if you're interested, please feel free. And I said, yes, I would love to. So I ditched a lot of my clothes that I had in my suitcase and replaced my clothes with the paperwork she gave me. Yeah, all the summer clothes, lovely South African weather that I came home from. And I started going through the paperwork on the plane. I was absolutely amazed at stuff I had no inkling about, no idea, but of course more gaps than there were answers. So in reality, the research for this book has taken me 6 years. And uncovering every family member, well, not all, I haven't found them all, but the vast majority, uncovering them and delving into their lives and seeing when they were born, where they were born, what circumstances their parents were in, all stemming back to sort of 1820, when South Africa had what they called the Great Trek, all the people leaving the Cape and moving into the hinterland, looking for wide open spaces so that they could farm. I uncovered some gems and I have fallen in love with a few of my ancestors. And so I'm kind of focused on them as well at the moment because I happen to be writing the sequel to this, or the prequel, what comes before the prequel. And every time I uncovered something new about the most recent distant past of my family, meaning my grandmother and my aunts and my mom and their immediate aunts and uncles and cousins, every time I uncovered something new, I would be very excited and phone them, or I'd send them an email and I'd say, look what I found. Da, 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 da. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. We had no idea. So I've managed to build up this big family tree of some real interesting, lovely people. And unfortunately, like most people, a couple of rotters as well.
Every family has rotters. Every family kind of secretly wants a rotter too, don't you think?
I think
in
so.
The past,
I
maybe
think
not
so.
Now, but in the past, makes it exciting.
I think so. So really, that's how that started.
Yeah.
But it's a never-ending process. I'm constantly turning up more and new information, thanks to the genealogy sites around the world who are uploading all the documentation that they've been given onto these websites. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them are for free. You can't always be sure of, because this is all volunteer basis.
Yes,
and so not everybody is as precise as possibly they should be when they input the information. So a lot of my time in the beginning was spent going down various rabbit holes because somebody had made a mistake and attributed a person to the wrong branch of the family. And the naming of the Afrikaans families, and I know that even in Italy, the eldest son will be called after the father's father. And so it repeats and repeats and repeats. And then
Same,
you've got a
Catholic
family
process.
tree looking at you
Catholic,
with
same.
10 people with the same name, which means that you have to go back and you have to compare everything to the copies of the original documentation, like birth certificates, marriage, and death, to be able to determine that, in fact, you've got the right person.
Absolutely.
So, and because I suffer from dyslexia, believe it or not, I sometimes have a great struggle trying to do this, and I have been very fortunate, and I feel completely blessed by having as many people as I've had in the genealogy research side of the world, helping me out, pointing me in the right direction. And I think even better, them sharing my joy when we finally put a mystery to rest. That has been a most wonderful experience where we finally know what happened to that person, if all the information that I have or that I assumed is correct.
I think a lot of families are really, because there are these resources now. I know in my family this is happening too, in relation to India in particular rather than South Africa. Have this fascination because there are more resources available, more information available, and this curiosity about where we come from. It's that could be an indication to where we're headed. But I wanted to ask you about this question of research, because what strikes me in your book are two things about the research that you've done and the context that you put it in, because you're always very clear about a sort of macro context, if you like, what's going on politically in South Africa, what's going on internationally, but it's never heavy. It never intrudes upon the story. It seems, I wonder how much editing you did, because you clearly know far more than you actually tell us in the story itself. But the other element of the research and what comes across in the writing for me so strongly is all the detail that you've had, that you've discovered, that you've been told, that you found out, what people ate, how they prayed, marriage ceremonies, the Bible, what happens with the family Bible, how people lived, what streets were like, what the flat looked like. These details are really, they really bring your story absolutely to life.
Well, first of all, I have a couple of boxfuls of photographs, black and white,
Right.
that I gathered from all my aunts. And many of them, I have no clue as to who
Yeah.
is in the photograph.
The small little photos, we've got each of those.
Tiny, you have to look at them through a microscope, the whole thing. The ones that we were able to identify, we obviously wrote on the back. So I had a pretty clear picture. And the aunts, very interestingly, when you asked them all the same question, they all came back with a different answer. So that in itself was another sleuthing detective piece of work that I had to get involved in. And when there was no definitive answer, I had to take the middle line. I had to say to myself, okay, what could have happened? What would most likely have happened? Knowing my family and me learning over the last 6 years what kind of life they were living, and just using a little bit of my own imagination, which is where the creative nonfiction side of things comes in. So the apartment I actually went to see, it's still standing, that
Oh, really?
building in particular. Yep.
Wow.
It's in a very downtrodden area today.
Mm.
Uh, the Mayfair title that they
Yes,
had
that's
in there
funny.
is complete opposite to what we imagine when we say Mayfair. We think London, gosh, the most expensive real estate, in the UK or the world, whatever the case may be, or close to. So I saw the squat red brick building from the outside. I could see the view. And then I had to take my aunt's word for it that they remember how tiny it was. So I just kind of went with the flow on that.
Yeah.
In terms of what was happening politically at the time and the little nuggets of history that I try to insert subtly,
Yes.
unobtrusively, was really because I then put on my commercial hat rather than just my writer's hat. And I said to myself, okay, is this book going to be interesting only to South Africans of a certain generation who will click in and know immediately what I'm talking about? Or because I believe my grandmother's story is a universal story that has happened to women around the world since Adam and Eve, do I want to make this book not international, do I want to make it worldwide
Accessible.
acknowledged, accessible, generic, so that anybody from any part of the world can pick it up? And although this one is set in South Africa, they can identify and say,
Absolutely.
gosh, yes, this happened, that happened. So the historical facts are just to try and pinpoint the time and the place where the story took place. And I was very sure from the very early beginning that I wanted to write only about the most, what I consider and what my aunts tell me, the most tumultuous years of my grandmother's life. Excuse me. So that was from 1935, when she was 15. The day after she turned 15, she met her husband. And I took it right through to 1964, which was, I would say, the last year, the bittersweet, the end of the terrible, tumultuous years, and then a feeling of, can I say, peace, perhaps a lot more calm and peace than there was before. And my grandmother turns another chapter in her life and moves on. So I was very sure that I needed to try and let people have an inkling of where we were.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because you also give us another side of South Africa. You know, a lot of people, when they think of South Africa now, think of Nelson Mandela and all the issues around that. You're giving us a more complex and nuanced view, I think, of South Africa and the
Well,
Afrikaans experience as well.
yeah, I think you're right. I think I focused primarily, my grandmother is the central character to the story. She is the protagonist without a doubt.
Yes,
And yes, I could have got lost in
totally.
politics and all of that. I didn't want that. I
Possibly
wanted
you
this
didn't.
to be a little bubble,
Yes.
and because this was her world. She didn't care very much about politics. So I wanted to focus and maintain that, but I didn't want it to be completely ungrounded for any other reader who may
Absolutely.
read
So
it.
I think you've got that balance really,
Thank you.
really well, actually. And coming on to Marie, I mean, I think you love your grandmother, don't you? You have a sort of great bond with her that appears to have grown through the writing. I mean, what an extraordinary character she is. It's quite tempting to see her as the, you know, the good to her husband and the love of her life, Bill's bad. But it's more complex than that, isn't it? Much more complex.
Yeah.
How do you see her as a character? How did your image of her shape and evolve? Partly through what your aunts say, but also through the writing process itself, because as you say, you have to imagine quite a lot. How much did you bring of yourself, do you think, to know?
Well, I grew up with my grandmother thinking she was my mother.
Yes.
And I thought that my mother and my aunts were my sisters. So I remember the day when my mum and my dad came to fetch me from my grandmother to take me home so that we could be a family. Um, I remember that day like it happened an hour ago, still with all the emotion and the stress and the confusion, and seeing my grandmother crying and my aunt Edwina, who unfortunately passed away last year on Christmas Day, because the two of them were together. So I remember that day enormously well. And then I didn't think very much about my grandmother as I grew up. And because we were living about 800 kilometers apart, I didn't get to see her that often. And so again, I kind of just skimmed over, never really giving it much thought. Yet I was always very close to her. And every time I saw her, I knew she belonged to me and I belonged to her. That DNA kicked in and there was just no mistaking that at all. When I started understanding who she was when I started the research. And the research started with me delivering to my aunts a list of 30 questions. And that's when I said they all gave me different answers. And Louise, my eldest aunt, had with her a wristwatch and a letter. And that wristwatch was a gift from her company, the government organization that she worked for many years, the Social Welfare Department. And the letter at the end of her career, where she left, and they thanked her for her service. And it was a glowing, gob-stopping letter. And the little wristwatch was a little gift. You know, everybody whipped around, cap or something.
Yeah.
And I do remember some occasions when I was with my grandmother at her place of work in the middle of Johannesburg at that time in Commissioner Street. And I remember being very proud walking down the corridor with her because people almost stood to attention. Now, she never became the head of her department. She was sidelined because it was impossible for a woman to be, and it was part of the Broederbond, which is that special men's only club. And it didn't matter if you were an idiot or not, you were going to be the head of that department, kind of thing. So, you know, the normal thing.
Yeah.
So I remember that very, very clearly. And then as I was going through the research and asking my aunts more and more questions, because the more I asked them questions, the more they remembered. Sometimes confusedly in the beginning, and then they became a little clearer because they were all in their, 70, 78, 79, that age group. So I built up a pretty strong picture of my grandmother, who I remembered her to be. And when I look back and saw where she came from, her rise was like a meteor in the sky, except she didn't blast out. She was consistent in everything that she did. She went to work every single day of her life, no matter what. She was
never mind the bunions. I mean, those
never
bunions,
mind the bunions.
I
never
feel
mind
the bunions
that she didn't have any hair. Yeah. So, how has my relationship to her changed?
Through the writing, did the writing process change your relationship with her, do you think?
Well, I felt she was with me when I was writing.
That's lovely.
And I find that when the writing goes smoothly, I think, oh my goodness. And I changed very little because I normally rewrite, do that whole thing. But sometimes there were big swathes of writing that didn't change at all. And I believe, that she was with me all the way. So, yeah,
it's a fascinating story. I mean, we see her first as a 15-year-old girl,
being
slightly rebellious, not wanting to have dinner with the kids anymore, but wanting to be with the adults. And suddenly she's blown off her feet by this older man, charming, delightful. handsome, completely outside her experience.
Absolutely.
Falls for him. Will climb and sink it, doesn't she?
Yeah, she
And
does.
so there's this great love affair that, of course, is tainted, isn't it? It's so complex. It's so difficult. Could you tell us a little bit about how she makes that journey with Bill? But she's not a totally, I mean, she's a marvelous character, and I don't say this in any disparaging way, but because she's not perfect. I mean, the woman drinks. I mean, you know, I'm not going to begrudge any woman a drink. You know?
No. She was a functional alcoholic. There's no question of it.
Exactly. And, you know, she did sometimes do dodgy stuff. A fascinating, full, complex character. Could you tell us a little bit more about her journey?
I think having read a lot about complicated relationships, what makes two people be attracted to each other? What goes on there?
Codependency.
Aside of the fact that it could be lust, first of all, because I don't think it was love. I think she thought it was love. She was swept off her feet. And I think Bill, her husband, William, who was always nicknamed and called Bill, is probably the more complex of the two of them.
I was going to come on to Bill. I just wondered about Emerita because she is your central character.
Yeah. So, you know, she didn't know anything. She was so naive and so innocent. And all she saw was this man. And I think learned very early on that maybe he wasn't the right person for her, but she tried and she did everything in her power to keep him happy, to make him happy.
He has a dark side, doesn't he, Bill?
He does.
I mean, he's charming, he's clever, he's cultured, but he has a dark side. You know, we learn a little bit about his past. It doesn't seem that he knows all that much about his own past, really, does he?
Well, he keeps it under wraps.
He keeps it under wraps, yes. So
which will be revealed in the book that I'm writing now.
Oh, great. Okay, roll on that book. Because that's very interesting. And obviously that's a topic that fascinates people, you know, why behaviors and characters are, how they're formed by early childhood experience and even by sort of transmitted experience, you know, across the generations, so what they call sort of generational trauma. So I don't know how much we're supposed to feel sort of sympathetic to Bill. I suppose that's up to the reader how much we might feel, you know, how much his own experiences impact
and it's
his capacity to be happy.
It's possible that I didn't write him in as much of a sympathetic light as I possibly could have. I did leave out one really important aspect about him that my aunts hauled me over the coals about.
Oh, really?
And they said, you know, we always had dogs and he was dog crazy. They always had dogs. They had dogs on the farm for as long as they can remember. They had a couple of dogs and he lavished his attention and love on these dogs. But my aunts also tell me that they remember him being very, very loving towards him and they adored him. They were tiny. I mean, Colin, my grandmother's youngest child, was only about 2, you know, when Bill was no longer. And the other children went up to the age from 2 to 12. So the 2 younger aunts, Edwina and Rhoda doesn't remember anything. Colin certainly didn't remember anything at age 2. But Louise remembered something, and my mum. But my mum never spoke about him. Louise only spoke to me now in the last 10 years, last decade, when I started questioning about the family. So sometimes I do feel a little niggle of guilt because I think maybe I could have written him in a slightly softer manner. But then I thought again, with my commercial cap on my head, what's the point of having two nice people? You know, I wanted two flawed characters. I have two flawed characters. And that was the truth. I wasn't going to make my grandmother out to be something she wasn't. I mean, she was a functional alcoholic all her life.
No. That's what makes it interesting. I mean, one of the things I did find is that there are these things in your book that, you know, that resonate a lot with sort of modern sensibilities. As I say, like sort of infant trauma, generational trauma, child abuse, sexual abuse,
repeated behavior patterns.
Repeated behavior patterns, which is very interesting the way you deal with them, because you don't sort of jump on them, as it were. You don't put them in our faces. They are part of the story. Was that a conscious choice? Because they are.
It was.
Yes.
It was. And the reason why it was a conscious choice, because while I was writing, I had this sudden wake up moment and I thought, oh my goodness, who's going to want to read this book? It's a long, dark tunnel with a tiny little light, a speck of light at the very end. I thought no one is going to read this.
No.
So, but I wanted to be true to the characters in good and bad. I did not want my ancestors rolling around in their graves in horror that I was going to purport them to be something that they were not. So I did make a very conscious decision. I made a conscious decision not to bang the drum and bring modern day labels and words and vocabulary that we understand today to that, because they didn't have that vocabulary at that time. They didn't have narcissism at that time and abuse. I mean, a man regularly beating up his wife was kind of par for the course. I just want to touch on one thing. My grandmother came from a very staunch religious family where the church was God, basically, in their lives. And her church didn't tolerate marriage outside of their clan. And her mum warned her and said, you're going to marry this man, and if something goes wrong and you fall on hard times and you need help, don't bother going to the church because they won't help you. At the same time, in South Africa, divorce really only came into legislation in 1910. And so when you got married, you literally made your bed, and that was the end of it. And with the fact that she then had 5 children by the time she was 29, under the age of 12, during that time period while she was having her children, she knew that she had to make do. There was no getting out of it. And when Bill passed, her family, who had children and families of their own, and probably problems of their own, I haven't even gone down that route yet, and unlikely to, they didn't want to be saddled. That was very clear. They did not want to be saddled with my grandmother's 5 children. So my grandmother had no option but to belly up to the bar and get on with it. And that's what she did. And she even told me every morning when she got out of bed, she would literally put the yoke on her shoulders and get through that day.
That relationship between Marie and her various sisters and her family and her parents is really interesting. It's very tender, despite all the restrictions and all the,
especially the unsung hero, the unsung sister was Auntie Dora,
Mm.
who took care of my mum and aunts when they were babies to allow my grandmother to go to work.
Mm.
And she was a stalwart in their lives for as long as they can remember. She was the closest thing they had to a second mum. She was always there.
I really look forward to reading more about Bill in your next work. But do you want to say anything about what happens to Bill in this novel? Or do you want to keep that for the reader to find out? I won't press you on it at all.
No,
It's up to you.
I feel that people can read. I've had readers already write to me and say, why did you do his passing? Why did you write his passing so quietly, such a subtle thing? There was no great fanfare, there was no great angst, there was no nothing.
I think that's brilliant to do it that way, frankly, because it's as we were saying before, because what you would expect as a reader with all the sort of, the noise around certain topics would be that would be a big clamorous moment, a climax of the novel in some ways. But it isn't. It's a part of life, and life goes on. And life has to go on because you have to put food on the table. You have to put your bunions in the shoes and get to work. You have to get the children into nappies, out of nappies, off to school. And you just have to get on with things.
Yes, you're right. So I won't touch on Bill and how he passed, but I want to touch on one other thing which I found really fascinating when I was doing the research, is that in the Delport family, which is my grandmother's maiden name, by 1978, no less than 5 men, 2 who married into the family and 3 who were blood family, all went to work for the South African prison services. And Pretoria in those days was the only prison where people could be hanged. They had the facility. And at the height of its hanging history, so to speak, they had a wooden platform where between 5 and 8 men at one time could be hanged.
Together at the same time.
At the same time, which involved a tremendous amount of weighing the prisoner to be hanged, making sure that the trapdoor sprung open properly with that weight. The person who worked out the knot and the noose had to make sure that they had the dimensions of the neck, the strength of the neck, and the length of the rope. And this was a great production. And I mean, it happened a couple of times a week. It wasn't like it was a once a month or once every year kind of thing. When I realized that there were 5 men in the Delport family alone who were all involved in some area of this particular environment, workplace, I was struck. I thought, goodness, that took the breath right out of me. And many of those men also went to go on to be alcoholics. And since I've got in touch with the cousins, this now my second or third cousin, because they're my aunt's first cousin or second cousins, and the women who are left have said that those men never spoke about their job. They would pass their job off, for example, as being a carpenter. That's it.
Yes,
that was his title.
Engineer.
Exactly. So it was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating for me to realize that, and very sad because it affected everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
It silently affected everybody.
Yes. talking about effects, I wonder how writing this novel, now that you've finished it and it's out in the world and people are coming back to you with comments and thanks and questions, has it changed you? Either in relation to your family or as a writer?
Well, in relation to my family, in relation to myself first, the writing is a separate story, but I'm addicted to watching the television series called Who Do You Think You Are?
Oh, yes.
It's an hour long. It's quite boring. It follows the same pattern. The only reason why I watch it is to see that spontaneous emotion bubble up from the inside of that person, whoever is, in search, when they realize, when they see, when they make the connection, this is my ancestor. This is whose DNA I share and carry in my body. This person is one of the building blocks that is part of my foundation of who makes me. And I get goose flesh every time, and sometimes I burst into tears as well. I mean, uh, just to see that raw emotion, and more so when people are orphaned and they don't know who they are or where they came from. That goes to another whole new level. I mean, when you're searching for somebody, that you had an ancestor by the name of so and so and so and so. That's one thing. You have a connection. You have a connection to that person. But when you're an orphan and you don't know anything, and then all of this comes to light, it humbles me. It humbles me, and I think how lucky I am to have my family, flawed as they are and wonderful as they are. I'm humbled and I'm thankful and grateful that I have them as my family. I know where I come from. So, in terms of writing, has it changed me as a writer? I feel more confident.
More grounded, perhaps. Frozen.
In searching through things that I wasn't aware of or I didn't know about, I feel confident enough to go into those areas and delve and dig deep. And I think the way one presents the information, hopefully without any form of judgment or criticism, because we're all human beings at the end of the day. We're all flawed. We all have our quirks. We all have our vulnerabilities. So even if it's a dead person you're writing about, how important it is to put that person's life under the spotlight in a well-balanced manner.
That's fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jacqueline? Because I think you've given us such a wonderful insight into your process, into the work itself. And I think people who haven't read it will be fascinated now to read it.
I would simply say my grateful thanks. I could not have done this on my own without the encouragement of my friends, my family, the people who've helped me online in searching for documents. And then, of course, readers. I mean, I'm getting emails from people who I have no idea who they are, and they've read my book and they say, oh my God, this reminds me of so and so. And then they have this cathartic experience where they can tell me, they feel free and open to tell me what happened in their life. And I don't know them from a bar of soap. And nobody's enjoyed the book. They say, I've loved the book, but I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down, but I dreaded turning every page, but I had to turn the page just to see what happened. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the connection of the communication and the connection with people who, obviously, this book has resonated with them.
It's touched a nerve, hasn't it? It's touched a nerve with people. And I think, thinking back over what we've been talking about as well, part of that is because you lay it all out there. You lay it all out there. It's non-judgmental. You know, you're not critical. These are immensely human characters that we can all relate to in one form or another. And you know, the laughter and the tragedy. And so congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So
Thank you. I
it's been
really
our pleasure.
appreciate this.
So thank you. Thank you. Shall we stop there?
Yes.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank
I'll
you.
be in touch.